Thank you, choir. Sometimes music can preach better than the preacher. It's the truth. So did you ever have a grandparent or a parent that repeatedly said something to you ad nauseum? Just curious. You know, no matter what, this was something they really wanted you to understand. Oh, I can tell you some stories. Well, I had nice grandparents. I knew one thing was certain. When we went to their home, we always went on Thursday night because my dad had Thursday night off, and we had to be back by Friday night. He was a dispatcher for the railroad, and he worked nights. So we would go regularly on a Thursday night to spend the night, and I knew when we got there that there would be a cake, a homemade cake in the kitchen that my grandma had made, and she didn't care if I had dinner or not. She just told me, go in there. She told us, go on in there, your cake's in there, and we could eat all we wanted. It was great. I loved her. I don't remember her ever telling me anything else. But it gets better. Because on Friday morning we got up, and they lived in a tiny little town in East Texas, 500 people in that town. And so we got up, and my granddad, after we ate breakfast, he would put us in the back of his truck with the tailgate down, and we got to sit on the tailgate. He would drive the back way to town. He would let us hang off the back and drag our feet. The boys would jump off because they're always cousins. I had lots of cousins. They're always cousins. And they would jump off and run and jump back on while the truck's driving. And my grandpa just laughed. He thought that was so funny. And then when we got to town, he had always had his pockets full of change. So he'd give us all his change and say, you just go buy whatever candy you want. And he would go get us a soda pop, as he called them. I'm going to get you a pop. And so my day was pretty much filled with cake and candy. It was great. These two things were consistent and regular. Now, as a mother and a grandmother, I don't know if my grandkids would tell that story about me. I think what they would say, in fact, I heard it this morning when I started to say something and a grandchild filled it in for me. Brush your teeth, make your bed, and do your homework. And I think that she and others, my children especially, would consistently remember those things about me. Do your homework, brush your teeth, make your bed. And they resisted, all of them. Every single one of them resisted as a child, but it was still expected. But I also took them to Sonic or to Andy's Ice Cream after they ate their supper. Jesus, as Mark tells a story, tells us these two things that Jesus said all the time. They were consistent and regular. And here's what they were. He will be betrayed, condemned, and killed. 3 days later, he would rise. That was one thing he said. He came to serve, and we must serve too. Those two things were coupled every time. And every time he told the disciples, they resisted. They didn't like it. This was the third time he had told them in 3 chapters. He also told them what he expected of them. So the first time, Peter rebuked him. And Jesus said, my followers must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. That was the first time. Next chapter, it was shortly thereafter, Jesus said, and the disciples argued about who was the greatest. As soon as he said, I'm going to die, and you are going to have to serve like I do, they argued. And they argued about who was the greatest that second time. Jesus said, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. So he consistently said those things. The third time, they're on the road to Jerusalem. And James and John asked to sit at his right hand and his left hand. Now they know what he's going to say, but they said, when you come into your throne, when you are king, and we sit on your right hand and your left hand. And that was their response. So let's hear the story. And this is from Mark 10. They were now on the way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were filled with awe, and the people following behind were overwhelmed with fear. Taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus once again began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. Listen, he said, we're going up to Jerusalem where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. They will sentence him to die and hand him over to the Romans. They will mock him, spit on him, flog him with a whip, and kill him. But after 3 days, he will rise again. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do us a favor. What is your request? He said. They replied, when you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. But Jesus said to them, you don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with? Oh, yes, they replied, we are able. Then Jesus told them, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with the baptism of suffering, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right and my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen. When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. So Jesus called them together and he said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them, but among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must first be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, did you catch the word again? Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. None of the disciples liked that. They didn't want to hear it. And I suspect that we don't either. Really? We really have to do this? Yet Jesus consistently mentions that, like it or not, and each time our human nature resists. We don't like that requirement. It's too hard. But there are certain expectations of us as followers of Christ. These are daily responsibilities that we have, kind of like brushing your teeth, making your bed, doing your homework. It's the habit and mindset of the Christian. So why does he say that? But actually, his words will make our walk easier if we can learn to understand exactly what he's asking of us. Serving will lead to a worthy life. And so we can discover this by understanding how his plan unfolded. And so this time, as he talks to them, he's telling them a little more, giving them a few more details. He's saying a little bit more of the inside story so they can begin to get it all. He said this would happen in Jerusalem. Oh, wow. That's the place where that big temple is. Oh, wow. That's a center. That's the city of David. Oh, wow. That's the most important city on the whole face of the earth. It's going to happen there. But they would also be tried by the Romans or turned over to the Romans, the Gentiles. So, it's going to be all our religious leaders. It's going to be the government even. Jesus would be charged and condemned to death, he said. That's a legal term. He's saying it's going to be in court. I know, I just heard it too. Y'all are looking around and where'd the voice come from? It's a legal term used for a formal trial. Oh, well, this is a big deal. He's going to go there, and there's going to be a trial by the government. There's going to be the criminal justice system involved. Oh, this is a little different than what we thought. He faced being mocked, spit on, flogged. These were all punishments that were like requirements or different levels of condemnation and punishment that the government had. And he would be killed both by the religious leaders and by the state. So why does it matter that Jesus gives all these details? Well, one thing it tells us is he knew it was a plan. He knew it wasn't incidental. He knew it wasn't random, like he was attacked on the road and just killed by people who didn't like him. We read about it in Isaiah's prophecy, which came 700 years before. That sounds like it's been around a long time. Maybe God has had this plan for a long time. Jesus didn't resist the plan. He didn't do what all we would do, because we wouldn't want to do that, just like we don't want to do some things our parents tell us. He understood the outcome, that through his sacrifice we would be saved. Wow. Through his sacrifice. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Well, what does that mean? Well, Tim Keller points out that Jesus Christ's purpose was to die and be a sacrifice. He didn't come just to set a good example. Now, I want you to think about this, because this has to do with all religions, okay? He didn't come to be a good example. He didn't come to be a human being that just lived a great life and then tells us to live a great life also. He wasn't trying to make us just be good. He was stepping in to actually rescue us. It's different from every other religion. There's not one religion where the leader has died for the people. So Jesus came from heaven, and as God's Son, he deserved honor. He deserved to sit on the throne right from the very beginning. He should have been served. But instead, he said, no, I came to serve and to be a ransom for many. If you look at the language, the word for being served means, or for being a ransom means on behalf of, for, on behalf of. I'm going to do this for them, on behalf of, in place of, instead of. They're not going to have to do it. I'm serving. I'm going to do it for them. Jesus stood in place of you and me to be a ransom. Now, ransom indicates there's some sort of a debt. It means to pay the price of release for a slave or a prisoner. So we're imprisoned, and he's going to pay the price for us to get out of that slavery. Now, you might think, well, I'm not a slave to anyone. I mean, there were a lot of Jews who felt like, hey, we're children of Abraham. We're not slaves. But we are. The slavery is a cosmic evil. It infiltrates every person, everything in the entire cosmos. It infiltrates even nature that has disease and death happening to it. It's so prevalent that it took a cosmic ransom or price to release us, one that we couldn't possibly pay ourselves. Not one human being on earth that has the power to pay that ransom. It took God-sized initiative and power to free us because evil is everywhere. Sin is in all of us. It took the horrendous effort, and we need to understand this as Christians. This is it. This is Christian theology. It took his crucifixion. He was only able to accomplish it because as God's Son who came, who should have been served, said, I come to serve. I come to serve. The Bible says he came to earth. That doesn't mean he was just born just then. He came because he came sent by God. He existed before he came. He came not to be served, but to serve. He gave his life as a ransom for many. That's Christian theology, something we need to sink into our heads. This is what Mark 10:45 teaches. This will be our freedom from sin. Isaiah predicted it many years before, and because of his experience, my righteous servant will make it possible for many to be counted righteous, for he will bear all their sins. Now, I bet you've heard something. This is something I've heard before. Why did Jesus have to die? I mean, isn't that pretty harsh of God? Why did it take that? Why didn't God just say, I'll forgive you? I forgive you. Why didn't God simply just forgive us all? Well, my question to you is, would anything change? Would it? What if that was your approach in your relationships, in your marriages, in your friends, and your brothers and your sisters? If your husband or your wife or family member or friend forgives you, does that result in you being freed from sin? Being freed from ever doing that again? What if you have this problem with anger? Does anybody saying to you, oh, I forgive you, does that help your anger? What if you're a liar? I saw a movie yesterday, and it was about 4 liars and thieves. They didn't change the whole movie. It was who was going to beat the other. If somebody said, oh, it doesn't really matter, Vladimir Putin, you're forgiven. Would that change anything? Would it erase? Would it make our world better? Would it solve our problem? No. The entire cosmos is held prisoner to sin. It's not going to go away with just a word. It's just not going to go away with a word. It's not. Not one word that could make it go away. Nothing would change. No release would occur. No freedom from sin would occur. No, it takes something much greater to overcome sin. It takes a great sacrifice to break the power of sin. That sacrifice comes from God. It's got to be God-sized. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. Love really is about sacrifice. True love, the foundation is sacrifice. It's at the center. When you get married and you have to give up part of your life, that's what it takes for your spouse. I mean, you can't. I remember when you told the story of your friend who said, Nadia, you're never going to get married because you got too much stuff here and there's no room for anybody else. That's so true. You have to, boy, we've been moving furniture around and getting rid of furniture for 2 months. You have to give up part of your life for your spouse. You make vows to love, honor, and cherish no matter what comes. I can tell you this is in a long-term marriage and a very short marriage. Because I'm finding in a new very short marriage that, oh gee, some of those problems I used to have, they just followed me right along. But we won't talk about that. For better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health until death parts you. That takes intention. That takes sacrifice. That takes remembering. That takes coming back to it, coming back to that commitment and remaking that commitment again and new. The best marriage is when you remember your vows and you serve one another. Amen. It's costly. It's costly. It's costly. You have to revisit it all the time, but you have that option with the Lord. He helps you. Think of the sacrifice you make when you have a child. You can no longer think only of yourself. You can no longer spend all your money just on you. It just doesn't happen that way. Your resources have to be shared. That child's going to cost you time. You're going to want to do other things, but you end up giving your attention there, your cash there. When you have a baby, you sacrifice your own life for that child. Why? You want that child to be a solid, contributing member of society. And that's what it takes. It costs you. The only way Jesus could redeem us was to give himself as a ransom. It couldn't happen any other way. He had to sacrifice himself, and he had to teach us how to serve. And that's why he keeps saying to them, it's kind of like brush your teeth, make your bed, do your homework. You have to serve. No, you're not going to be served. No, you're not going to sit on my right and my left. No, you're not. You need to serve. If you want to be first, you've got to serve. It wouldn't happen with just a word. It cost him greatly. Cost him. That's the only way forgiveness works. It takes great will and intention and love to save us from death. I mean, it's something out of our hands. It's amazing. It takes a stunning act of love, stunning commitment, stunning service beyond measure to free the entire cosmos. But that freedom, man, that freedom is everything. So we must understand the charge, and we have to encourage each other because we want to resist. We don't like the charge to serve and carry on Jesus' understanding of the good life. Jesus says this is a good life. Now let's go to Ukraine for a minute. Christians there, people who take courage, who stand up in commitment because they love their land. They're serving each other when they stand in front of those huge weapons and machines that are coming against them, and they're standing. They say, well, I can't leave, because if I leave, my neighbor is going to be all by himself. That's commitment. I'm hoping a lot of that commitment is driven by Christ. And then maybe the Russian people see that commitment, and they want to make that commitment too, to save lives, to serve others. It's not a life of self-indulgence or risky behavior. It's not a life that's accomplished by the desires of childhood. To have it all for me. To eat dessert first. To never brush your teeth or study. And jumping out of the back of a moving truck. It's not that. It's quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. It's you and me serving one another. It's you and me being faithful in our marriages. It's you and me reaching out a hand to a brother. It's you and me walking the streets of this city, seeing what the needs are, helping the city that you live in. You can't help the whole world, but you can serve your spouse, you can serve your friends, you can serve your neighborhood. And that's the good life. It's worth the sacrifice. That's the love of Jesus that he's demonstrating. If you do this, it'll make your life worthy. Amen.